In order to save your sanity, I get to dig into the bowels of their ABC. I wade through the neck-high sewage and I gain insight into what on earth were they thinking when they came up with this. Well, that's what I've done this week, and because, you see, that's how I found out about the 50-50 project. That's a project they copied from England's BBC, and the aim of this project is to tackle the, quote, severe underrepresentation of women in the public sphere. And they do this by assessing every report that's written, every internet write-up or every television presentation, and if it's got too many blokes in it, well, they insert a women's perspective, whether it adds any value or not. And the reason for this is because the report states the ABC have, and I quote again, a special obligation to lead the way and ensure our news coverage fairly represents our society. Well, anyway, the secret bit about the public broadcaster is that they're actually trying to change the country, because that's what the report says as well. It's also noteworthy that the men are underrepresented now, according to the ABC's own statistics. But that's gender equality for you. And I have to point out, I mean, given that the ABC thinks gender is just a social construct and that biology and anatomy play actually no role in anything, so how do they assess who's going to be giving them the actual quotes? The process, the review must be quite something to behold. Do you actually have to formally declare how you identify before you apply to make a contribution under the 50-50 project? Or do they just make the call based on your fashion choices and haircut? If they did, that approach would be either bigoted or judgmental, and they're both sins under the Church of Woke. Now, I'm not being judgmental there, I'm just saying. I'll also point out that according to the lovies at the ABC, there are actually more than the two genders. Some say there are as many as 51, which makes this woke media behemoth a genderist organisation, because they're not catering to all of them. They only pick up men and women. But they are working to improve their range of meritless quota bias, because it's not enough to be with just gender. They're moving actually into the equality space. You see, the 50-50 project is going to have more people from linguistically diverse communities, is going to have more Indigenous Australians and more people with a disability in the name of equality. But I just want to point this out. There is actually an entire channel devoted to Indigenous issues. It's called NITV. And then we've got an entire taxpayer-funded network for culturally and linguistically diverse communities. It's known as SBS. Now, as a taxpayer who chips in some of the more than $500 million in annual funding to those channels, which I don't watch, I'm not sure why they need additional representation on the $1 billion tax-funded behemoth that I don't watch either. But what I found rather odd was a self-congratulatory report, because it had no mention of editorial diversity. Now, this is despite the words of one of their advocates, a Carol Schwartz, who's proudly printed in the report, the 50-50 report. She says, equal representation always matters. It supports critical thinking, diversity in thought, and ultimately better outcomes for all. The ABC must represent the voices of all Australians. Well, I happen to agree with Carol Schwartz. But of course, in the ABC world, equal representation of voices of all Australians doesn't apply to areas where they don't like what you have to say.